Thanks to all of you who are with us today for this webinar on using Otter and PowerShell DSC for Windows Server provisioning and configuration management. I'm Julie Jurgic from Inedo, and we are pleased to have Mark Johnson presenting with us today. He's a solutions architect who has been implementing DevOps processes for many years. In this webinar, I'll begin with a short introduction to Inedo's configuration management tool, Otter. Then Mark will take us on a tour of Otter, specifically focusing on how PowerShell DSC can be used to extend its capabilities. Otter is a configuration automation tool designed for Windows that uses infrastructure as code to define and manage server configurations. It allows users to model the configuration of servers, roles, and environments, monitor for drift, schedule changes, and ensure consistency across servers. Otter can spin up cloud servers, build containers, deploy packages, patch servers, and perform many other multi-server service automation. Otter's web-based UI lets users quickly review the status and plans for all servers at a glance. It lets users handle server configuration through both a drag-and-drop editor or a text mode that users can switch between without hassle. And now I'll let Mark go more deeply into why you should be using Otter. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Julie. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Today, we're going to deep dive into using PowerShell DSC in conjunction with Otter. First, we'll talk a little bit about why we might want to use Otter in our environments for managing configuration drift on systems. So it supports the concept of configuration promotion across multiple environments. So if you have a production, dev, that type of thing, you can promote those configuration changes. It supports a variety of package types, such as Chocolatey, PowerShell, NuGet, and others. It's a very fast setup time, so you can install the Otter server in just a couple minutes. The download's a pretty small download. It has a robust user interface. The web interface that you get out of the box allows you to do quite a number of things in terms of managing your systems and servers visually, and it also gives you built-in editing tools. The configuration is bidirectionally linked to Git repositories, so you can check in changes to the repository, or you can make changes in Otter, and those changes go back and forth. And Otter is free, so you can get started today, download it, and start using it. So why would we want to use PowerShell DSC? I think the most compelling reason is that just the sheer amount of content out there for it. There's over 200 modules on PowerShellGallery.com. Some examples are Hyper-V and Azure Management, SQL Server, etc. So Microsoft is putting all of its eggs in that basket for managing systems. It uses DSC on premises as well as for Azure system management. And it's generally considered the de facto standard in IT departments for managing servers with an infrastructure as code methodology. It does use open standards, so it uses MOF and WSMan, and it is cross-platform, so it runs on Windows and Linux, because PowerShell also runs on Windows and Linux. It's a familiar editing experience, so PowerShell DSC is just standard PowerShell with a few extensions. So you can get syntax highlighting and IntelliSense in the PowerShell ICE, Visual Studio, VS Code, etc. So why would you want to use these two technologies together? Otter simplifies the distribution of DSC configuration scripts and resources. Otter is very good at pushing those configurations to agents. There's agentless mode, so it actually requires no configuration other than ensuring WSMan ports are open. Otter also provides an enterprise-level dashboard for your DSC status, which DSC out of the box lacks. There's no graphical interface. It's just logs and command line output. DSC resources can be executed just like any other operation within Otter, so it's very easy to get started to just start using resources. And Otter can also use existing DSC configuration scripts. So if you have large, complex DSC configuration scripts, Otter can go ahead and execute those. And so one of the nice advantages is that you can deploy your DSC configuration changes by checking into Git repositories. So you can use a code-first methodology of code promotion. And yes, we can move that code across all of your environments in a very controlled manner with having reviews and pull requests and that type of thing. You can organize all your servers by environments and roles, so you can visually see at a glance how your environments are configured and set up. And also using them together, using Otter and DSC together, you can leverage all of your existing DSC knowledge. As many IT departments already have pretty deep knowledge in DSC, so you can leverage all your assets and experience there. And using them together, you now have a single source of truth for both your DSC configuration status as well as any other configuration you might have within Otter. So Otter can use all existing PowerShell DSC content. It can use DSC configuration scripts. It can use DSC resources and composite resources. Just real quick, the difference between resources and DSC configurations. DSC resources are basically the atomic building blocks. That would be something like a file resource, ensuring a particular file exists or a folder exists. DSC configurations are more about orchestrating those DSC resources. So within a DSC configuration, you would have maybe for each loops over data or multiple resources being enacted on servers. So how do we use DSC resources within OtterScript? OtterScript is just the kind of abstract language that's used within Otter. So there's an operation called PSDSC, and that is available only in the text mode. So I'll show you a little bit of the editor experience, but it's not a drag and droppable kind of thing. You have to just type it out. It has exactly the same parameters as DSC resources themselves with the addition of the Otter configuration key, and that's just used by Otter to uniquely identify that resource. So you can enact custom resources as well as third-party resources, and we'll show you that. This is an Otter script example of the PSDSC operation for the file resource. And you can see the configuration key just refers to the destination path. So that is what makes it unique, is that path. And the contents are just coming from an Otter variable called $index. So let's go ahead and take a look at how DSC resources work in Otter. So first, I'm going to go to a dev machine I have. This is just a VM in the an Azure VM, a low-powered headless VM. So I have this command here, and we're just basically, well, actually, that's not the command I want to run. I want to do, so I'm just going to get the current machine environment variable for something called my first Otter var, and it needs to be at the machine scope. Okay, so you can see that that is currently set to that value. So we're going to go ahead and update that value and give it a different variable name as well. So let's go over to now we're going to hop over to the Otter UI. Okay, scale that up a bit. And so first we're going to hop over to the modules. So all these modules are just ways to abstract Otter code. And I have one called setenv DSC resource. And so now this is going to pop up the editor. And so you saw that we already have this variable defined on that system. And right now it's set to this value of basically this variable is set on this server name. Server name, just an Otter variable. We're ensuring that it's present, and we're setting the target to machine. A little interesting syntax here, and this is just a way to pass in PowerShell arrays, because the target can take an array of strings. And so you'll notice also that in this operation, the PSDSC operation, we have the environment, but we're qualifying that with the module name here. This is an extension module that we're using because this particular extension to the default environment resource provides the target, which I want to target specifically the machine level. So let's go ahead and change this to my first Otter var 8, and we'll just verify. We'll just change this a little bit. We'll say today, and so let's save that. So now when I save that, what that did is, so you'll notice that the version now incremented. So this that went ahead and committed that to the local Git repository and pushed that up to the GitHub repository as well. So if we looked at the version, we could see the history here. We can compare with current. So it has some built-in differencing functionality. So let's go to our servers and let's look at dev VM. So right now, we'll go to the configuration tab on that. And so we can see that that variable we looked at is set to, it's already current, so that already exists on the system. So now what we're going to do is run check configuration. Okay, so now we're going to watch the live output for this execution. So this is what this is doing. What Otter is doing is making a, since we're running an agentless mode, so effectively we're just doing PowerShell commands remotely over the internet to that VM. It's just going to execute this code on that remote system. And the scripts to configure that to allow the firewall ports and things like that are in the example Git repository. Okay, so let's see what happened there. Let's go back to the dev VM and look at the configuration. So we can see that it has drifted. So we see the my first Ottervar 8 is not present. We can look at the details. So the ensure is currently absent, which is not what we wanted. So let's go ahead and remediate with a job. So you can set up servers. If you look in the overview, you can set up servers to report only, or you can set to auto remediate. Right now I have it set to just report only, so I can step by step show how it works to remediate a drift. So let's remediate that with a job, and that just creates a job that will execute the DSC operation to correct the drift. So now we're looking at the remediation, and this is again is going to make that remote PowerShell call to that system. And so now we can see there is a, right here, we see that it detects that drift. And so now it will, after it does another check, it's going to run into the remediation phase. So let's verify that that completed successfully. Okay, so it says here that it's completed successfully. Let's just jump back to the server real quick and verify that that is indeed the case. So we just need to change that variable name to 8. Okay, so now that variable is now been set on this server. You can see with the changed value on the string. So let's talk about DSC configurations within Otter. So we can use any existing DSC configuration scripts. DSC configurations are compiled and tested before enacting. Now, generally, you don't really need to be creating from scratch DSC script configurations unless there's some specific need, but because most of the things that DSC configurations can do, Otter can do just as well, if not better. It's useful to be able to execute those if you already have a large collection of complex DSC configurations. So there is a visual operation for this. So you can see here we have the we're going to ensure this particular DSC resource, and this is what the contents are. So you'll see that this is a little bit more complex than just a single resource. Here we're importing several different modules, and we're going to apply that to any server that has the particular DSC role of web. And so DSC configurations take a configuration parameter optionally. And so when you're compiling, so that those parameters are applied at compile time, not runtime. So you can see this is the syntax for passing configuration data into the DSC configuration. So let's take a look at running DSC configuration scripts in Otter. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go back to Otter, and we're going to go to Assets. And we're going to look at PowerShell scripts. In here we have one called DSC_ Win 2016 server. I just use DSC underscore as just a convention to identify that this is a DSC script, so it has to be executed in a special manner. So this one is pretty basic, just setting a registry key, and then we're iterating over the static data of these paths for these different variables. And so we're, again, using the environment resource. Now you'll notice that within here, we don't need to qualify this with the module because we import the using DSC practices. You import those modules at the top, and so that will override any built-in resources, and in this case environment will get overwritten, which gives us the ability to do this target here. We want to target the machine environment variable, and we're just iterating over this PowerShell map here. Let me scroll right here. You can see get a numerator, and so we're going to apply. We're going to end up with 3 different variables being created. Now let's just change these values. So as you saw, what I showed you earlier on this system, if I print out these variables, they're set to my path 1, 2, 3. Now we're just going to change the values of those to 4, 5, and 6. So let's save that script. You can see we went to version 2 on that, and let's go to servers, and let's look at the dev VM. So let's check configuration, and we'll view the execution. And so that's going to make that WSMan call over to that virtual machine to begin executing the different Otter configurations and DSC configurations. We can also switch to detail view if we want to see kind of more of a grouped, groups all your different operations. It's a convenient view. Okay, so that's completed. Let's take a look at the configuration. So it says we've drifted. Let's look at the details on that. Okay, so now this particular composite resource has drifted. So let's take a look at that. Now you don't get much detail here, so you're not seeing any, like this particular variable as we saw when we did it, use the resource directly within Otter script. Here we just know that somewhere in this DSC configuration script something drifted. So let's go ahead and remediate and verify that we can remediate using DSC scripts. So go ahead and run that. And so that's going to, again, perform the remote check on the server. And so it'll retest for drift before it will apply the configuration. Okay, so there we go. It's getting close. And it's done. So let's verify just in the, this should tell us that it is all green, good to go. Let's verify that those variables got set on the server. So we're here on the same server, and let's take a look. Okay, so now those variables got updated by that DSC configuration script. So now let's get back to it. Okay, so now let's talk about how we would extend Otter using third-party DSC modules. So these are the standard PowerShell commands you use for installing modules, PowerShell modules from the PowerShell gallery by default, and you can use get DSC resource to see specifically modules and resources related to DSC. So let's take a look at doing a demo of that. So first, let's go over to the Assets tab. So we want to look at modules. We have an ensure PowerShell modules, and so right now, this is a module that will just iterate over a list of modules, PowerShell modules to be clear. So this is a Otter module, and that just brings in a list of modules, and then it appends to it. So we're going to for each over this variable here. And so I'm doing this in line here so that we can promote these module changes to other environments. So now in this case, we are going to add a couple modules here. So one is going to be the CNTFS access control on it, and X Windows update, and X web administration. And so basically what that's going to do is that's going to loop over this list of module names, and then we're going to use PSDSC and this package management provider resource, which you can install from the PowerShell gallery, and then we just have the key, which is the name, the module name, and then we're going to ensure, and that's a variable that comes in as a module, as a Otter module parameter. By default, that's present, so we're ensuring that it's present. You could also make that to be absent. So let's save that plan. Now, if we go back to servers, we'll look at the dev VM, and we'll look at its existing configuration. And so that we do not see those modules listed here. We can go ahead and run check configuration. So when this completes, you should see 3 drifted modules. Let's look at the execution. So again, this is going to go out, make a WinRM connection to that Azure VM. So we see some drift happening. We see the template is expected to be true, but the actual is false. And so it's going to do that for each of those modules. And this is the, again, this is the PSDSC output. Okay, and so that completed. Let's take a look at the current configuration. So you can see now we have those 3 drifted PowerShell modules that contain DSC resources. And so what we want to do now is run a remediate with job. Create that job. And it's going to make a connection back out with WinRM to the Azure VM. And it's going to first check the configuration, verify that it's in the expected state. So here's that output from the DSC operations. You can see here it's running the test DSC, and this is just outputting those PowerShell commands that are running behind the scenes. Very verbose output at this point. Okay, now we're setting. You can see that it's running the method set, which is a DSC operation. Okay, that was successful. No errors, so that's good. Let's refresh our configuration. And now we see that it says that those modules are installed. So if we go over to the development server, and let's just do get DSC resource. So now we see the X web administration resources. They're grouped by the module. We see the X Windows Update resources, and we also see the CNTFS access control resources listed. So that successfully installed those modules. And so that's a basic way you can deploy new DSC operations and resources. So let's move on. Let's take a look at what those collected resources look like. So now what we'll do is we'll run another check configuration. Well, first we'll look at before I run that check configuration. So this is the set of all resources on that server. It's basically that same output I showed you without the module name listed, but it shows the version of those resources. You can configure servers to collect different package types, so you can do chocolatey packages, Debian, RPM for Linux. You can do DSC, which is all I'm checked to do right now, and also Inedo universal package types. So let's go ahead and run that check configuration. And so when that runs that check configuration, you'll see in here, it's going to collect the modules. And let's switch over to detail view. As soon as that finishes, we can view the status. Back to the live output. Okay, that is done. So now we can see our packages number of packages went from 33 to 51, which is basically a listing of all those additional packages from the CNTFS resources and the Windows updates and the other administration modules. So yeah, and that just shows that how to configure that. So now one of the great things about using Otter is that we can promote our changes to different environments. Otter can store server configuration, role configuration, and scripts in Git. Any changes to configuration will be applied at the next scheduled execution. It can be used to promote code to higher environments by using Git branch and merge best practices. So let's talk about that. So if you're starting out in your dev environment, you can push-pull between Git, and then using Git, you can perform a pull request to your test environment, to your staging environment, and then to your production environment. So let's go ahead and demo that. So first we're going to go over to the Git repository, and we are going to issue a pull request from dev, not to master, but to test. And so let's look at the changes there. So we can see we're adding those modules. We're changing that variable name to MyFirstOtterVar 8. And there's some other ancillary changes here, commenting out some code, and looks like a syntax change. So let's create that pull request. We're going to merge it. Okay, and then we go back to Otter, and we look at our test VM. So the current configuration looks like we have some drift here. Should be remediated by when we run the next remediation. So let's first check the configuration. So let's view that execution. So test is, in this case, not an Azure VM. This is my local system, so it'll run a little bit faster. But it is going to use the WinRM for communication, so it is a remoting call effectively. Which is nice because then you have consistency, whether it's local, remote, it's the same protocol, same firewall rules. Okay, so let's look at that configuration. Okay, so now we see changes. So this is drifted. My OtterVar 8 apparently already existed, so that's okay. But these three modules did not exist. So let's remediate that by running. So now it's going to issue the WinRM requests to my local system, verify the configuration's current, and then install those packages. So we're still in the test phase for the modules, and now we're probably entering into the remediation phase. Lots of logging. So yes, we're in the set phase for DSC. So now we're setting that drifted configuration. The packages are being pulled down from PowerShell gallery and installed. So we got a green, so no errors. That's great. We'll refresh this, and now we have greens across the board. That's excellent. And we'll take a look. Let's do get DSC resource. And now we'll see all of those resources grouped by the module. So the module is that third column. We have the Windows Update, the Web Administration, and the NTFS Access Control. And so let's also verify that our variables got changed appropriately. Let's go to, let me get the command for that. Too many times. Again, too many times. Okay, so those variables are set. That's great. And that's pretty much it for promoting code within Otter. So yeah, as you can see, it's a really effective way to move your code from low environments to high environments to make sure that you're not deploying anything that should not be deployed to more sensitive environments, primarily production. But it's also very useful if you're deploying changes to, let's say, build systems. You don't want to just willy-nilly deploy changes and upset the flow of development processes. So it's very useful for that, so you can get a review, get eyes on those changes before you deploy them. So that is it for today. Were there any questions?
Great, thanks, Mark. We do have a few questions that came in during the webinar, so I'll go ahead and start in on those. First one, is it possible to immediately trigger configuration checks when a change occurs on a Git branch?
Currently, that is not a supported feature. So right now, if you commit a change and you didn't manually run configuration, it would just, at the next scheduled execution, which by default within Otter it's 60 minutes, you can configure that down. You could go to 5 minutes, although that's probably too high a frequency. So yeah, it would just pick up that change at the next scheduled run.
Okay. And with PowerShell DSC scripts, you can specify resource dependencies. How can you accomplish the same thing with Otter?
Sure. So within Otter, and I'll just show you real quick. So within roles is where dependencies are controlled. So if we look at this server DSC resources, which I have set to all the different environments, and all the systems I showed you today are set to use that role, you'll see that it has a dependency on this PS package consumer. And this is basically, this means that if this configuration is not configured on a system, this dependency has to be installed before applying, even checking the next dependent role. So in this case, we need to have this package provider of NuGet in place before we can do any of the PowerShell management type of stuff. So this dependencies allows us to really control that dependency chaining, to effectively gives us the ability to bootstrap a system from nothing and have all of your dependent role executions still function. So that's kind of the basics of how you would emulate those dependencies that you get in PowerShell DSC.
Okay, and here's one more for you. What's the difference between this and Ansible? I think this uses PowerShell DSC, whereas Ansible uses YAML. Any other aspects, or do both do the same thing?
Good question. Yeah, YAML configurations are very, very common, and they're pretty, they're everywhere. So the difference, I mean, I would say with Otter, it's very easy to get up and running. So the installation process is very quick and easy. The user interface is, I would say, is very user friendly. It's great for Windows with the PowerShell DSC integration, with the package integration. So, I mean, I think, yeah, obviously they're in the same space of configuration management. Clearly, Otter is geared towards Windows environments, but it can do Linux as well, because PowerShell now runs on Linux. So yeah, we're not using YAML. You could certainly, invoke operations that leveraged YAML, but there's no built-in YAML. Really, the main technologies in Otter are PowerShell, Otter script, JSON. Those are the big, like, kind of configuration code that you're going to be using. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Mark, for presenting today.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Julie.